welcome to UFV. And I want to thank everyone here for coming and joining us. I'm here, John Vissers, as your MC on behalf of Pipe Up. As you know, Pipe Up has been working very, very hard in the last few months to develop not only a very clear position, but also a way of challenging Kinder Morgan, and part of that process is through public meetings, and that's why we're all here tonight. We're all here to learn. We're here to learn from you, and certainly we've got a terrific panel lined up to share what they've already learned. So we also have with us tonight Deputy Mayor Les Barkman. Mr. Barkman, thanks for joining us. And it's very important that we have a representative from the City of Abbotsford here tonight to not only to witness but perhaps participate. We're going to start the evening with a short YouTube clip of a spill in Kalamazoo River. Some of you may have already seen it, but it will really underscore some of the serious concerns that this community is going to experience in the years to come. And part of the reason, of course, that we are opposed so vehemently to this Kinder Morgan proposal. So I'd like to start that now. I think it might be a good idea to have Ben West speak on the Wilderness Committee's position. Ben is a Healthy Communities campaigner for the Wilderness Committee, and he's been active for many years in the environment field, but also in community. And we're honored to have Ben here with us tonight. Thanks, John.
So, thank you all for coming out tonight. It's a beautiful, beautiful sunny day in the middle of the summer, so it's fantastic to see, all these folks coming out to sort of talk about a very serious topic on a beautiful summer evening. So thank you all for being here. As John told you, my name is Ben West, and I'm the... Can you hear me now? I'm the Healthy Communities campaigner for the Wilderness Committee, which, if you're not familiar with the Wilderness Committee, we're Canada's largest membership-based wilderness preservation group. And the role that I play is basically I'm the urban campaigner for a wilderness preservation group. So I organize campaigns around climate change and toxins primarily. And we've decided that to devote both of those campaigns entirely to our campaign around the Kinder Morgan pipeline and the Enbridge pipeline. Because there's no bigger threat to our province in terms of climate change or in terms of exposure to toxins right now than these two pipeline proposals. So I'm going to jump right into it. So the video you're about to watch is going to tell the story of what's happened in Kalamazoo. And probably everybody here has probably seen the news story. Has anybody here not seen what's gone on in Kalamazoo? Don't see any hands. All right. So just to kind of paint a picture for you, this family, the LaForge family, they woke up one morning and there was just an awful, awful rancid smell, like rotten eggs was the way they described it. The smell was so bad that they called Enbridge, the company who owned and operated this pipeline, and said, something's going on. Enbridge didn't seem to think there was any problem, so they, called city officials and firemen and anybody else they could think of. Nobody seemed to have any indication that there was an oil spill or some sort of an incident. They couldn't figure out what was going on. But it was bad enough that they left their home. They literally picked up, left the house, and didn't even lock the door because it smelled so bad. A couple days later, the company figured out that there was an oil spill. And that oil spill was not only bringing horrible smells, but actually really high levels of benzene and other potentially quite harmful toxins, right along this river system, the Kalamazoo River. And the LaForge family was one of the families that was unfortunate enough to live relatively close to the spot where the spill started. And just to tell you what happened to them, they've now abandoned their home completely. They tried to go back a few months later, and they went in there and, they were hoping to kind of save some important, memorabilia and stuff from their family's history, wedding dresses and, prom dresses and that sort of thing. And they went into their house and everything still smelled so bad in the house that they literally just had to leave everything behind. So I bring this up because, if there's an oil spill, and when you're talking about pipeline and tanker infrastructure, it's really not a matter of if there's a spill, it's a matter of when. This is the first indication, is these smells. We've heard similar stories from the folks up on Sumas Mountain who woke up one morning and smelled something really terrible and really weren't sure what it was and called Kinder Morgan and complained about it. And at first Kinder Morgan told them that there was nothing to be worried about. By lunch, the kids in school were being kept inside because the smell was so bad. So often we get really focused on these kind of big picture issues like climate change and the potential health impacts of a major oil spill, but we kind of forget that even with a relatively small incident like the Sumas Mountain one, I mean, folks were saying in the time it took them to walk from their front door to their car in the morning, they were feeling nauseous. And often the first people to actually become aware that a spill is taking place are folks like many of you who live right along the pipeline route. Who are really the first line of defense, as Kinder Morgan put it, because they're the first ones to actually smell and experience an oil spill. So I started there just because it's kind of a tangible, visceral sort of thing that we can all relate to, that awful aroma. But of course, it's a really big problem that we're talking about. But the really big problem can manifest from quite small errors. That's the size of the hole in that pipeline that's created all that problem in Kalamazoo. And at first, the company Enbridge actually thought it was an air bubble in their pipeline because the pressure had dropped off, which sometimes can happen if there's an air bubble. And basically, the way they know there's a spill is their pump stations start having some issues with the pressure gauges. So they looked at that and they thought, well, it's probably an air bubble. What we usually do is we increase the pressure. So they actually started pumping the oil harder through that pipeline, through that hole. And it wasn't until 2 shift changes had gone by before somebody actually figured out that this was an oil spill. And then months later, they dug up that pipe and actually found where the incident took place. And of course, this is the end result of an old pipe. This is a pipeline that was built around the same time as the existing Trans Mountain pipeline, the one that goes right through your neighborhood. They're moving a different kind of oil through it. And many people think that it's this switch to diluted bitumen, which is a much heavier kind of oil that needs to be blended with corrosives so that it can be broken down enough that you can actually push it through a pipe. Many people think that perhaps the fact that we're talking about a new kind of oil with a new kind of, ignore the guy with the camera behind me, I'll try to, because it's a new kind of oil with a new kind of corrosive agents that are being used to actually make it possible to push this stuff through a pipe, that it's putting a lot more wear and tear on these pipelines. So we're at a really early stage of really knowing what the true risks of this diluted bitumen are. But we're definitely learning a lot from the experience that we had at Kalamazoo River, because this was one of the first times that there was a major oil spill incident that happened with diluted bitumen. And in the report that just recently came out, the EPA quite notably said we were totally unprepared to deal with the diluted bitumen spills. They really had no idea that it was going to be that different. And because what happens is, and this is a story from the Tyee that does a good job of explaining this, is that basically what happens is you get the heavy tarry substance separating from the gases and from some of the toxic chemicals that are blended into the bitumen. So now you've got these benzenes and other chemicals being released into the air that people in the local area breathe in. And at the same time, you've now got these heavy tar balls sinking to the bottom, making it much more difficult to clean. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is because here you are with a pipeline running right through your backyard, and it's been there for decades, since the 1950s. But the major difference is that it was a pipeline that was being used primarily for local consumption, not for the sake of export. And what we've seen is that as we've shifted towards an export orientation, as Kinder Morgan has bought this pipeline in 2005, and their stated goal has been to basically transform that pipeline into an export pipeline, as well as building this new pipeline, which would be explicitly for export. There's been a shift in terms of what's actually being pumped through that pipe. And what we're seeing is increasingly you're now bearing this extra risk of this diluted bitumen, so Kinder Morgan can make more money by exporting this oil abroad and actually refine less and less oil locally. For many people, the first time they became aware of the Trans Mountain pipeline was when this happened. It lasted only about 12 minutes. It was a 30-foot geyser, and this is when the pipeline was ruptured in, 2007 in Burnaby. And I can tell you, we went and knocked on doors in this neighborhood, in this sort of surrounding area where that oil spill took place. And there was many people who actually didn't know there was more oil pumping through the pipeline the year after this happened than when this happened. There was actually an expansion of the pipeline in 2008 that increased the amount of oil that was going through the pipeline by about 50,000 barrels a day. And all for the sake of export. And many people in this neighborhood didn't even know that it had taken place. So when we're looking at what public consultation really looks like, when we're looking at, in a democracy, what kind of oversight we get, what kind of control we have over whether these projects go forward. If this is the case study for how Kinder Morgan is going to approach public consultation, it's not a pretty sight. When literally people who had an oil spill on their property don't even know that there's more oil going under it than they did the year before. And maybe many people in this room may not even know that expansion happened in 2008. That was the first stages of the proposal that Kinder Morgan has right now, which would drastically increase the amount of oil that's being exported. So just in case you're wondering kind of how often oil spills happen, you don't have to take my word for it. This is a report from the National Energy Board, who oversees all the sort of regulation of pipeline and tanker traffic in Canada. And according to this is just a graph that shows you the number of pipeline spill incidents. What you see is basically in the last 10 years, there's about 400 pipeline incidents of one size or another. Some bigger, some smaller, but all of them are significant. Anybody who says that an oil spill is insignificant has never lived near what they call a small spill. The folks up on Sumas Mountain, I doubt, would consider the small incident that happened recently to really have been that small. The slightly larger one that happened in 2005 was still considered a small incident as far as Kinder Morgan was concerned. But of course, any time that you're being exposed to large amounts of super toxic chemicals in the air, especially for young people or for elderly people who have pre-existing health conditions, I mean that's a serious threat. It may not be a threat to hundreds of thousands of people like a major incident in the inlet would be, but it's still significant. Pipeline incidents are really just part of doing business. And in fact, what's not reflected here is that there's a certain amount of oil that's just considered to be normal spillage. It's just normal operating procedure for a small amount of oil to spill on a regular basis. The companies actually don't even have to report anything smaller than a certain amount. That there's these small amounts. It's like every time you fill up your gas tank and a little bit of oil drops off the end of the hose, and it ends up on the ground. You have the same sort of thing happening when you're filling up tankers, when you're switching from one pump station to another pumping system. There's these small amounts of oil that are spilled over a long period of time. One person did a sort of back-of-the-envelope calculation based on Enbridge's projections, and they said it adds up to about 800 barrels of oil a year when you add up all the bits and pieces of oil that's being spilled along the pipeline route day after day, over a year. So, with any new oil pipeline infrastructure, even without a major incident, there's more and more of these chemicals and toxins being released into our local ecosystems. And of course, it's the goal of my organization and many other environmentalists to reduce our exposure to toxins, to reduce our exposure to the things that cause cancer, to reduce our exposure to the things that cause a number of other health problems. And, and moving this direction with these kinds of pipeline projects is obviously something that aggressively moves us in the wrong direction. So this is just a picture of the two pipeline projects, and of course the tar sands. Maybe I'll walk over here. So just in case you haven't sort of seen this represented, this is the tar sands or the oil sands or Mordor or whatever you want to call it. We'll usually get at least a little laugh. Thank you. So we've only actually extracted about 3% of the oil that's in one of the largest remaining reserves of oil on the planet. When you look at these projects, there's a reason why the Northern Gateway project is called a gateway. It's about opening up trade of this oil to the Asia-Pacific market. It's not about local consumption. It's explicitly about export. Some people call the Trans Mountain Pipeline, this purple line, the Southern Gate, because it's basically the same strategy, just in a different route. And this company, Kinder Morgan, is pretty smart. Instead of trying to start from scratch and build a whole new pipeline, they decided they'd build a whole new pipeline about the same size and just build it next to an existing pipeline. So what they did was they bought up this pipeline, which brought about 90% of the oil that we use into the Vancouver, Lower Mainland, Fraser Valley area. That's the pipeline we've had since the 1952. But the proposal is that they're going to build a whole new pipeline, which will bring the total capacity up to about 750,000 barrels a day. And the vast majority of that will be for export. And already in the time since Kinder Morgan bought this pipeline, we've seen an increase from about 20 tankers a day leaving from the inlet up to about 80 tankers. A year. 20 tankers a year up to 80 tankers a year. So already we've seen an increase of about 60 tankers annually, explicitly for the sake of export, bringing more and more risk to the inlet and actually refining less and less oil locally. And right now Chevron has a process. The Chevron refinery is actually asking the National Energy Board to guarantee them that they actually will have access to the oil that Kinder Morgan's bringing through their pipeline, because Kinder Morgan's trying to get to the point where this is basically all being exported and none of it's being refined locally, or at least that Chevron has to pay the same price that the export market pays, which is substantially higher than what they pay for it right now, which would mean higher gas prices for you and I. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but it's actually interesting to note that as we're talking about increased oil moving through our own province, it could actually result in higher gas prices and less jobs in refining and less work in that field. Of course, refining's problematic, and I'm not a big fan of it either. John's telling me I got to stop talking soon, so I'm gonna. So I'm just going to really quickly talk about one thing. Often people say to me, "Okay, but I drive a car. How are we going to get off oil?" And I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time talking about this. Although, if you want to talk more about it during the question and answer, I'm happy to. The important thing to remember is that we've got some big decisions to make right now. We're basically running out of time to actually build the kind of infrastructure that will help us, reduce our consumption of fossil fuels that cause climate change. And as a lot of these old power plants and facilities reach end of life, basically the International Energy Agency is saying we've got 5 years to decide whether we rebuild the same kind of silly infrastructure or whether we try to do something different. These pipelines are a perfect example of where this kind of decision is being made. Do we go further down the road of more dependence on fossil fuels, or do we start moving in a different direction? And it's important to remember when you're talking about tar sands oil in particular, that it's not necessarily just an energy issue. It's actually primarily a transportation issue. Tar sands oil is fuel for transportation, and in particular, it's fuel for big rigs and airplanes and that sort of thing. It's a heavy kind of oil. In fact, to turn it into gasoline for cars, you have to blend it with lighter crude and with natural gas in the upgrading process. It's not a particularly good fuel product. But as much as I'm a fan of wind turbines and that sort of thing, we could build them all across Canada and it wouldn't get us off oil unless we also look at our transportation infrastructure. And this is a great book by a UBC professor who's trying to look specifically at what needs to be done in terms of land use and transportation planning in a way that would actually help us get off our addiction to fossil fuel. And he uses Metro Vancouver as a case study, which is quite useful if you're looking at this sort of thing and you want to sort of look at specifics in Metro Van. So I'll give you one specific example, which is probably something you're all familiar with. But this is the interurban rail line. This is my personal favorite example of sort of a tangible thing that can be done. What you're looking at in the yellow is Highway 1, and what you're looking at in the blue is the old interurban rail line, which stopped moving people in 1952, around the same time that the pipeline was built. There was a big shift to sort of automobile culture taking place. And what you'll notice is that all the major cities, including pretty much where we are right now, are right along the route of that rail line. And the reason is that when you build rail, you get hubs of densified development around that infrastructure. If you build freeways, you get more and more sprawling, car-dependent development that eats up farmland, food security, and reduces air quality and that sort of thing. So here's a tangible thing that could be done in terms of investment. At a fraction of the cost of what we're spending on highway infrastructure, we could be moving a tremendous amount of people, creating a lot of jobs, and it's overwhelmingly popular. When polling's been done, something like 80% of people in this region support it. So it's a real win-win in terms of jobs, and also helps protect farmland, which is super important. So there are these kinds of solutions that are out there. We really just need to start getting serious about it, focused on it, and shift the debate away from how we go further and further down this road of depending on oil, and how instead we can create jobs and build a different kind of world. So anyway, that's me for now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks also for pitching our Rail for the Valley project. Some of you might know I'm very involved in that as well. Thanks, Ben. And I'm sure there'll be some questions for Ben during the Q&A. We'll get as much time for that as possible, so I'd like to move on as quickly as I can. I'd like to introduce now a person who's become a good friend of mine just in the last few years. She's everywhere. She's working very, very hard for our community. Her name's Lynn Perrin. And she has been a spokesperson for years for Water Watch, and with really, really impressive results. She's an ALR champion, She never misses an opportunity to speak out in defense of the environment. She holds a master's in public policy at SFU, and she's here to share with us some local risks and concerns that we're going to be facing with Kinder Morgan. So Lynn, come on up, share your thoughts.
Thanks, John. Thanks, John. Good evening. I live 5 houses from the Kinder Morgan pipeline. This is my neighborhood, and you can see the sign of the Kinder Morgan pipeline. So I didn't even know that the pipeline was there until last September. I heard a chainsaw in the green space, and I'm the guardian of the green space. So I went to see what was going on, and there was a company there cutting down trees along the pipeline right-of-way that goes up over Sumas Mountain and through the green space and through our urban neighborhood, down the hill, through Matsqui Prairie, through Mount Lehman, through Bradner and into Langley. And it enters Abbotsford over the Sumas Prairie, through the farmland, and over the aquifer. This is where I live, and this is the pipeline. And there are 5 schools right here. So that is definitely one of my concerns, is the impact it has on our water, our air, our health. And the first interaction, I actually did talk to Kinder Morgan, and she said that she was happy that I was paying attention because they like the public in the neighborhood to watch their pipeline. And then in January of 2012, we had the spill up on Sumas Mountain, and some concerned citizens, including John Vissers, invited Kinder Morgan and the National Energy Board to come and share information with the public. And actually, it just unsettled me more. It didn't calm my concerns at all about this pipeline being in our community. And what happened there was that the public who had been affected by the spill in the Augustin neighborhood had asked Kinder Morgan and the National Energy Board what the health impacts or implications or risks were of that spill, or what was going through that pipeline. And Kinder Morgan and the National Energy Board actually sat tight-lipped and refused to provide any information to the affected people. One thing they did say to the affected people was that they were happy that there were noses on the ground, and I quote, "We're the noses on the ground for Kinder Morgan." And another thing that they admitted, and it was the same with the Kalamazoo spill, was that there is no one along that pipeline doing surveillance. It's almost 1,200 miles from Edmonton to Westridge Terminal, and there is not a single Kinder Morgan employee doing surveillance on that pipeline. So they expect the public to be their surveillance. Now I have, I'll just show you something else. Now this is also another thing that we're dealing with. This is the creeks up on Sumas Mountain. And the Kinder Morgan tank farm is right among those creeks. And many of those creeks go two places or 3 places. They go to the Fraser River, they go into our aquifer, they may end up in the Vetter, but that is one thing that we really have to take seriously, is what is out there and what a pipeline spill could harm. Now, there was a spill in 2005, and I went onto the internet and onto the Transportation Safety Board investigation of that spill. And one thing that the Transportation Safety Board said they're concerned about, and that spill was at Kilgard Creek, which is just sort of coming up off of Sumas Prairie up onto Sumas Mountain. And I believe it was a number of hours, if not a number of days, that spill took place before anything was done about it. But one thing that the Transportation Safety Board said they were concerned about was the blasting from the aggregate mines and the possible impact on the pipeline. So here we have all of the aggregate mines, and there is the tank farm, and there is the pipeline going right along where there's blasting, right along there. Now, the aggregate mining hasn't reduced since then, and in fact, if anything, it has increased significantly. And I just got a hold, I was just able to get a hold of the Transportation Safety Board, and they said that they really haven't done any follow-up with regard to that risk that they identified. So that makes me even more concerned. It appears to me from my research, and I've been doing hours and hours and hours of it, that there's no apparent oversight or enforcement by either federal or provincial agencies. It seems like we're all on our own as far as dealing with any kind of spill or any kind of risk. Like I said, they haven't done any follow-up with regard to the blasting from aggregate mining. The 2012 spill, I got a hold of the Transportation Safety Board and I said, why hasn't it been investigated? I don't see it on your investigations. I don't see it on your current investigations that you're doing. And they said, well, no, actually, we've decided not to investigate that one. And I looked, when you see what Ben told us about how many spills there have been, and when you look at the Transportation Safety Board's investigation, I'd say they probably investigate 1 in 10 spills. And their mandate is public safety. So I'm worried about that. Who is taking care of us? Who is taking care of our interests? As far as the provincial BC environment goes, there was a 2000 spill in Fort Nelson, cost $35 million to clean up. It's not even reported on their website. It's not on the National Transportation Safety Board website. It's not on the BC Environment website. So who's paying attention here and who's looking into things and who is, because if you don't find out what happened, how can you prevent a future spill from happening? So I've also got a hold of Kinder Morgan and the National Energy Board, and I have not had any response from them in 6 weeks when I asked them when they started shipping diluted bitumen, because we know for certain they are. Cenovus Energy shipped in February of this year. We know absolutely for sure they are shipping diluted bitumen. And I have not heard anything back from either Kinder Morgan or the National Energy Board. All I wanted was a document that showed me they were permitted to do that, and neither have provided me that document. Now, the only thing I can think of is that there is a difference in terminology. It looks as if the National Energy Board, rather than calling it diluted bitumen, are calling it extra heavy petroleum. So maybe I'm not asking the right question. Maybe I need to ask when the extra heavy petroleum was permitted. But also, when I did look at the tariff and tolling information on the National Energy Board's site with regard to this pipeline, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, the heavier the oil, the more per barrel the pipeline company gets. So while we bear the risks, because the most risk comes from the heavy, extra heavy, the pipeline company makes the most and profits the most. And Kinder Morgan is worth $9 billion. So folks, I'm just urging you to remain involved, remain informed. There's going to be National Energy Board hearings coming up. I hope sooner than later, and I hope that each and every one of you will be there to say we don't want this in our community.
Thank you, Elaine.
Want me to get out of that? Yeah.
Sure. And I can testify that when we had the spill on Sumas Mountain, which was literally a stone's throw from where I live, we had never experienced odor even remotely resembling the kinds of odors that we got from that spill. People were getting up at 4 o'clock that morning with headaches, stumbling out of their homes, saying, what the heck is going on? And it took the better part of a day before Kinder Morgan even acknowledged that there was a spill. First they called it a release. They had all sorts of interesting names for it, but they didn't call it a spill. And it was thanks to the work of the Wilderness Committee and others that we got the media involved, and we were able to expose the company for what had happened. And I can also say that I was invited to a walk through the facility with city councillors. I believe Mr. Barkman was with us that day. And we were never told that the product that had been spilled out of that tank was anything other than ordinary oil that they'd been pumping for years. And up until now, to date, we still don't know what was unique about that product and why people got so sick from it. There should be lawsuits. We don't know if there are, but we're assuming there probably will be lawsuits. But this is the future, folks. There will be spills. It's inevitable. And these products are dangerous, and we as a community have to acknowledge that. Anyway, sorry for that little rant, but I just wanted to back up Lynn. She's telling us the truth. I'd love to hear from Mr. Gardner, Eddie Gardner, who's a resident elder, Aboriginal Access Center here at the University of the Fraser Valley. Very involved, and certainly galvanizing support among First Nations people here in the Fraser Valley in opposition to this project. Anyway, Mr. Gardner.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've been doing a little bit of a review on the economics of the Kinder Morgan pipeline project, and I think it's becoming more. People are becoming more aware through the media about how much the communities are going to benefit economically from the Kinder Morgan project. As a matter of fact, recently we have Paul Henderson of the Chillliwack Times offered his opinion that economic boost from pipelines too rich to ignore. And I like money. Anybody? It certainly calms my nerves. And we can look at, he points out that there are billions of dollars that would flow to government in terms of royalties and municipal taxes, big boost to the GDP, all that should put a big old happy smile on the faces of federal, provincial, and municipal politicians. Of course. And at the same time, we have BC Premier Christy Clark. She's in a pitched battle with Alison Redford about how much Alberta gets in terms of the benefits and how much BC gets and takes all the risks. She's pointing out that even through the Calgary-based Canadian Energy Research Institute, Alberta gets $291 billion in GDP growth over 25 years as a result in increased sales caused by Kinder Morgan's Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, dwarfing $9 million for Ontario and a measly old 4 billion for BC. So they're squabbling about how many billions are going here and there. And Kinder Morgan, of course, has very deep pockets. And for example, he points out that the city of Chillliwack would get $625,000 in annual municipal taxes. And wouldn't that help give a facelift to downtown Chillliwack that needs one? But what really is not included in the GDP is the cost of any spills that could ruin the drinking water in the Fraser Valley. We have the cleanest water. We brag about having the cleanest water, in North America. That would go by the wayside if Kinder Morgan has its way. It would contribute to the demise of salmon, the blue herons, the ducks, the eagles, and it would lay destruction to farmlands and cause adverse effects, of course, to human health and well-being. That's on the other side of the equation, and it's a cost that really truly is too high for us to bear. And when we look at the technology that is being used, it is being promoted that all the jobs that would be created in building the pipeline would go to BC, because that's where we're going to have, the pipeline built. But a lot of the technology that is being used, the qualifications that are required to build that pipeline, they will wind up bringing people from other areas of the world or other parts of the country, and not necessarily people from BC. And once the pipeline is completed, then those jobs are lost, they're gone. We don't need them anymore. So we really don't have, in the long run, a very high number of jobs that will remain here in BC. And if we look at the intent, what is the intent of building these pipelines? The intent is to sell oil to China, to the Asian countries. That's the intent. Why would they want to do that? They want to do that because they want to diversify their market to increase the cost of oil. If they increase the cost of oil, then who gets to pay for that in the end? We do. The cost of running business in the world economy, the engines of the world economy are run by oil. And that is the case here for the developing countries, one of which is Canada. So in Canada, if the price of oil goes up, all the businesses have to take that and absorb those costs. And they have to absorb them one way or the other. One is to lay off people or increase the cost of any goods and services. So we're going to look at an increase in the cost of living, and we're going to look at higher unemployment in the end. I would urge each and every one of you here today, and tell all your friends, to read this book by Jeff Rubin. It's called The End of Growth. And he promotes the idea that the cost of oil is going to go up in triple-digit numbers. And so eventually what's going to happen is we're going to have, yes, a lot of oil left in the world, but it's just going to be way too much to bring it to market. The cost of getting that to market is going to be too high. And that's why he says we're heading into a time when we're going to have static economies. And when that happens, local economies are going to have to readjust how they're going to do business. And people are going to be forced to turn their attention to clean technologies and reduce dependencies on oil and coal. So I think that when we really look at the economics of what is going on here, it really is not in the best interest of Canada. Much contrary to what Prime Minister Harper, Prime Minister, he's the Prime Minister of Alberta, I understand. But him and his colleagues are looking at demonizing anybody who questions the environmental impacts as terrorists and all those kinds of things. But we're not. What has been put on the board so far is real, and we do not want that to happen. There are two very powerful forces that are for Kinder Morgan. One is that there's a tremendous amount of money, and the world economy is driven. You know, it uses oil. We're all addicted to oil. I'm an oil alcoholic. So is everyone else in here. But eventually, we're going to hit the wall. And when we do, we're all going to have to get used to living with less. It's simple as that. And human beings are going to use their own creativity to make the kind of adjustments that are going to be required. So the other very powerful thing that Kinder Morgan has on their side is that Harper said, Cabinet has the final say. Doesn't matter what British Columbia or the province says. Doesn't matter what any of the environmental assessments come out and look like. Cabinet has the final say, and they're going to push through. They're going to push it through. He wants this that bad. So what's on the other side? What power do we have on the other side to counter that? There are two powers, maybe more. But two that come to mind are Aboriginal rights to land claims, constitutional Aboriginal rights for proper consultation. And there is a growing wall of opposition to the Enbridge. Enbridge has already put their proposal forward. And Kinder Morgan said that they're going to make their proposal in December of 2014 and then build their pipeline by 2017. So the Aboriginal people, many of the Aboriginal communities have come out in support of opposition to Enbridge. And you can bet that there will be Aboriginal opposition to Kinder Morgan when they bring forward their proposal in December 2014. And what is the other power? The other power are the people. people from all backgrounds, we collectively can stop this. We, the people, have the power. We, the people, have to believe that we can stop the destruction of supernatural BC. Thank you very much, my dear ones.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. Well spoken and much appreciated. Knowing that First Nations are leading the way in this challenge, and we're playing catch up here, but we're doing our best as a community, I think. And we're in the beginning stages, like Eddie said. It's going to be 2-3 years of process before anything really happens. But we know from experience from other challenges that this community has faced. I can think of SE2 and other large challenges that we don't let the industry wear us down and see us walk away, and we don't fill with despair and say it's hopeless, we can't fight. We learned that if we stick together as a community, and if we reach to others as friends and supporters, then yeah, we can win this one too. I don't see a challenge. Oh, this is actually Sven's. I think this is Sven's topic. I don't want to steal his thunder. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, and then right after that, we're going to jump into a Q&A with the audience. I know there's a lot of interesting people in the audience here that I recognize. I'd love to hear from you as well. So Sven Biggs, he's the campaign director for Tanker Free BC, and certainly has done a terrific amount of work challenging the tanker issue. And as we know, of course, you have to go upstream. You've got to connect all the dots, and the pipeline is a big part of that. So Sven?
So I'm going to attempt to use YouTube too. We'll see how this goes. If it doesn't work, we'll just cross your fingers.
What kind of risk would I take? Well, this one time I went on a blind date. It was set up by this guy I thought was pretty safe. He was my boss. It was his daughter. She wasn't quite what I was expecting. What's a risk not worth taking? Well, I know one for sure. It's a risk not worth taking.
So that short video was put together by some of the volunteers that work for Tanker Free BC. It worked. It worked. So tonight, I want to talk about one of the questions I get asked the most when I talk to people about pipelines and tankers. And the number one question I get is, how are we going to stop these guys? And I understand that question. We're up against some pretty powerful opponents in this fight. But when you get down to it, there are really only two kinds of power in this world. There's money and there's people. In case you're wondering which side Kinder Morgan and Enbridge are on, let me give you a couple of facts. Enbridge has said that they plan to spend over $100 million on the environmental assessment process. That's their ad campaign, their public consultation, and everything they plan to do to convince British Columbians that this project is in their best interest. Richard Kinder, the chairman and CEO of Kinder Morgan, which is of course named after him, is personally worth $8.2 billion, making him the 46th richest man in America. I attended a forum, something like this in Burnaby recently with some folks from Kinder Morgan, and they said that they will make $5 a barrel on the oil that flows through the pipeline. So I did a little quick back of the envelope map. $5 a barrel, 750,000 barrels a day times 365 days a year equals a little over $1.3 billion a year. So in revenues, this is what they stand to gain. We've also, of course, seen what kind of power, what kind of influence money has on our government. We've seen a tax on civil society. The federal government in their last budget bill, one of the things they announced is they're going to spend $8 million over the next 2 years investigating every charity, environmental group that is working to stop these pipelines. They're going to use your taxpayers' dollars to investigate their political opponents. They also, of course, changed the rules about how these projects would be authorized and approved to streamline them. And then weeks later, after the report about Kalamazoo came out, the Minister of the Environment said, well, maybe we needed stronger regulations around how pipelines are approved and regulated, somehow ignoring the fact that his own government had just undermined them. So how are we going to stop these guys? Well, what we need is a people-powered movement, and that means we need people like you. And that's why we're holding this series of town halls in affected communities, because we want to open up this campaign. It can't just be me and Ben and Lynn and Eddie. We need all of you to be involved. We've seen over and over again around the world what kind of things people power can do and how much more powerful it is than the power of money. Whether it was getting women the vote, or the civil rights movement, ending apartheid in South Africa, or bringing down dictators around the world in the last couple of years. We've also seen here, closer to home, SE2, people power stopped that. We saw people power right here in your community protect your local water system from being privatized recently. So I want to send you away with a couple of things to do to start building the people power movement here in Abbotsford. You have a great group that is started that work here, the Pipe Up Network. And I know clipboards went around earlier, and we asked you all for your contact information. If you haven't shared it already, I urge you to share your information with Pipe Up and get involved. They've been going door to door in local communities, especially in neighborhoods along the pipeline, talking to people and let them know. And it's those kind of conversations that's going to build this movement and get people involved. We've been doing the same thing in the Lower Mainland, going door to door in communities near the terminal, that neighborhood that you saw earlier in Ben's slide trajectory where the spill were. We went door to door and talked to everybody there. We didn't find one person that supported the pipeline expansion. Their neighborhood's going to be dug up to build this project. Some of your neighborhoods are going to be dug up to build this project. Just the impacts of that alone are something that you need to think about. So I'm going to leave lots of time for questions, because I think that's a great way to start getting you involved. And thank you again for coming tonight and helping to start this movement.
Thanks, Barry. So now we get to an interesting part of the evening. And as I said, I recognize people in this group, and some are new to me, and I'm sure new to others here. I encourage everyone here that has something to contribute, or a challenging question, or a concern, or perhaps even an opposing opinion, to share that with us now. We've got 2 microphones, and we'll try to get them around as much as possible, and we'll get as broad a range of opinions. I encourage you to try to stay on topic. We're talking here about Kinder Morgan and Trans Mountain Pipeline's plans to increase their capacity, and how that's going to affect our community, and also how it's going to affect our climate and our world. And we have one question here.
Hello, my name is Bill Busby. And in the mid-90s, an oil line blew up in Bellingham. And And the question I have is, if the companies that are going to do this oil line told you how much a child's life is worth? Because Bellingham lost a couple of kids.
Can someone speak, that was the explosion in Bellingham? Yeah, and can someone speak to that? Does anyone have any, I remember reading about it. Oh, we need a microphone, that's right.
I think it was rhetorical.
Yeah.
Well, it was, but I'm just curious that we don't hear enough about these sorts of.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, the Bellingham incident was just one of a lot that, you don't hear much about. I mean, you might have heard recently that the Cherry Point refinery exploded. And there was a fire and an explosion there, and it was quite harmful to the folks who work there, obviously. And I mean, that's the other end of this pipeline, right? Like it splits on Sumas Mountain about 100,000 barrels a day, heads down that way. It actually happened only a couple of weeks after the Sumas Mountain spill incident. I was pretty amazed actually that Kinder Morgan was getting up and announcing their pipeline expansion plans, like after they had two major incidents. I mean, one relatively small, as far as oil spills go, and one quite large, just visually. And of course, we've just seen this explosion at the Chevron refinery in California, which was quite, visible. So I mean, it just seems like every other week there's some major incident taking place somewhere in North America, let alone what's happening elsewhere in the world. And you got to kind of scratch your head and wonder how many of these things we need to see happen before people really wake up and take action. But it seems pretty clear to me that these projects are overwhelmingly unpopular. I think it's really just a matter of whether we get organized enough to stop them.
Yeah, I want to thank you for bringing that up. One of the things that I learned about the National Energy Board, they're the ones who are supposed to be at arm's length for their assessment, environmental assessments, and from the government. But Harbour changed all that, and it's not going to be like that anymore. There are two things that Robin Allen says that we need to know about. One is that the National Energy Board doesn't consider the development of pumping stations that would increase the volume and the speed of the oil that is going to go through the pipelines. So they can slow down the oil, or they can increase it. And the tendency, I would believe, is that they would want to increase, the amount of oil that will flow through the pipelines in years to come if they get it built, so that they can sell more oil. So when you increase, they say they once said that it would go up to 850,000 barrels of oil per day, and then they said, oh no, it's only going to be 750, not 850. So I don't trust them, and the more of this bitumen that goes through, which is highly toxic and very corrosive, the greater risk that there is going to be for spills, and it would harm not only the environment and the animals, but it has a potential harm for humans as well.
Thanks, Eddie. And we have another question?
Yes, my name's Kevin Chipperfield. I'm just wondering, I got quite confused on what's actually going to be flowing through these pipelines, whether it's bitumen or crude oil, and what is the chemical difference between what these materials are and in the end what their effect is going to be on the environment if they spill?
I'll give you part of the answer at least. Bitumen is like what you see on your road surface, pavement, and there's a picture of it up on the wall there. And what they have to do is they have to put condensates, add condensates into it in order for it to flow through the pipeline. And the condensates are very, very toxic. And one of the common chemicals is benzene. Benzene is carcinogenic if you're exposed to it long enough. And I don't know, it sounds like the people in Augustin were exposed to benzene or something close to that in January of this year, because the human symptoms of a benzene exposure is nausea or headaches and stuff like that. And if you look at the reports out of Kalamazoo, they figured that it's actually caused deaths in Kalamazoo, what is in the diluted bitumen. I mean, passed on to Ben.
Just for a kind of a quick backgrounder on bitumen, for anybody who's not super familiar with it. This is a really low quality source of oil. We're running out of the light sweet crude, very easy to extract, very easy to process, easy to turn into gasoline products kind of oil. Bitumen is a blend of sand, clay, and oil that's deep underground. It's very heavy and sour kind of oil, so it's got a high sulfur content. And it's got a lot of carbon, not a lot of hydrogen. So even to turn it into a viable fuel product, you have to what's called upgrade the fuel. So after you've removed the sand and clay, dug this up from deep underground, you then have to blend in natural gas. So there's a tremendously high energy and water requirement just to produce the oil to begin with, to then have a product that you can then dilute and then push through a pipe. So that product is then eventually taken to a refinery, and it needs to be a special heavy oil refinery because most of the oil refineries are just not set up to deal with this kind of oil, which is a big part of the reason the Keystone XL pipeline project is such a big emphasis of the industry right now, because that would bring tar sands bitumen down to the heavy oil refineries in the Gulf Coast that deals with oil from Venezuela. So long story short is it's a very different kind of fuel product. And if the question you're asking is what's going to go through the pipeline, this isn't the kind of question that normally you have to answer because it's a mixed use pipeline. Usually there's one kind of product that goes through a pipeline. This pipeline's been mixed. It's been moving everything from jet fuel to diesel to natural gas to semi-refined fuel products like Syncrude and dilbit, going back quite a ways. But increasingly what we're seeing is that dilbit is where the money is. The heavier the oil, the more of it they can export in its raw form. It's kind of like the raw log issue. There's the most money to be made for these companies if they export raw diluted bitumen. So increasingly our assumption is that as much as possible, that's what Kinder Morgan is trying to export. Although it's very difficult to get accurate information about exactly what is going through on any one day of the week. Because basically they're out there to make money, and whenever they can make the most money, servicing their customers by providing, that's what they're going to do. But the assumption is they can make the most money by getting as much dilbit out there as possible. It also just happens to have some pretty particular kind of risks that are new. Any oil spill is a bad thing. It's not like Exxon Valdez was a great oil spill. But we're talking about even more difficult to clean up and with some new kind of health consequences that folks are not yet quite familiar with. So we're making sort of an extra emphasis on that because it's a new thing.
Thanks, Ben. And Kevin, of course, one of our concerns in the Fraser Valley is that we're dealing with infrastructure that's 60 years old and was never designed in the first place, either to meet today's safety standards or to transport this heavy product. And we should be concerned as a community, absolutely, and our farmers should be concerned. So we have another question?
My name is Regina Dalton, and I'm a resident of Abbotsford. I brought an article that was in the Vancouver Sun this past Friday. The headline says BC would pocket $4.7 billion from pipeline construction. That's the main headline. Underneath you read, province to gain most from Northern Gateway operation. Then it tells you it comes from a study. But if you go into this particular article, it doesn't tell you what I had learned earlier in the day on Friday. When I listened to CKNW there, the hostess was on top of it sufficiently to ask the person she was interviewing who had paid for this study, and apparently was jointly commissioned by our federal government, the government of Alberta, and Enbridge. Now, this article, front page article in the Sun, doesn't mention that. I sent out a letter to the editor, which I don't expect to get printed. I sent it out on Saturday. Since it wasn't in Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, I think it's being sort of deep sixed. I also, though, got in touch with the publisher and 3 senior editors, again, via email, so they may never answer me. But we have a room here of people who may be also interested in, once they've read this article, I passed it by my husband too. I didn't miss that they didn't credit it to whom had sourced the original study. So I would suggest if you would read the article, note that it contradicts a previous study, and perhaps get in touch with folk at the Sun, because I'm one person, I don't know if anybody else has done it. If even half of the people in this room did it, maybe they would have to pay some attention to what is happening. So thank you.
Thank you, Regina. Just keep doing what you do best.
Can I just add one thing to that? I promise I won't just keep rambling on. If you are interested in writing a piece about sort of the jobs perspective on this, there's a great piece of research that's been done by Mark Lee from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, where he looks at how many jobs are at risk if there was a pipeline spill, and how much of the BC economy depends on things like tourism and fisheries. And we're also looking right now at doing a study on what the impact on property values would be if there was a large-scale spill. So there really is another side of this equation. It's not just jobs versus no jobs. It's what jobs are at stake versus how many jobs are actually being created. And I think it's important to look at that aspect as well.
So there's another fishy study to look out for. It's done by the Fraser Institute. Any of you that are familiar with the Fraser Institute, I think you'll know their track record. They're a very right-wing think tank that's funded by some of the same people that fund the Conservative Party. They did a study that showed that Canada would benefit about $10 billion from the 2 pipelines put together, which is coincidentally about the same price it's going to cost to build. They also, throughout their study, they couldn't find any benefits for the province of BC, or very few. Most of the benefits that they could accrue were tar sands jobs in Alberta. So it's interesting that not even a right-wing think tank can find it outside.
Okay, we have another question or concern?
Yeah, my name's Jerry Pinnell, and I'm out here from Maple Ridge. Now, one of the things that's been talked about already, or mentioned a couple times, was the difference in price between the light crude and the heavy crude. And now what I've heard is that the reason for the difference in price is because sweet Texas crude, or the price that's used here in North America, so anything that we have here in North America that's sold in North America is sold at the sweet Texas crude price. Anything that's sold offshore is sold at the Brent rate. And I was wondering if Ben or one of the other people on the panel would be able to explain to the audience what the Brent rate is and what the difference is between them.
I'm not sure what the genesis of the term the Brent price is. Maybe somebody in the audience does, but I mean, basically there's a light sweet crude price that's been grandfathered in over a really long period of time. This is actually kind of at the core of what Chevron is fighting over right now with the National Energy Board, with the Chevron refinery, because they're paying this grandfathered in price, even as the type of fuel that's going to them is changing. And the price that's paid offshore is substantially higher. I've heard as much as 3 times higher in some news reports. Of course, it's all fluctuations in the marketplace, but I mean, there was an emphasis, and I think it came in the Ronald Reagan days, where there was this sort of drill baby drill ethic that was spreading, and this desire to consume local oil before imported oil. So there was a sort of a policy prerogative that was put forward to sort of prioritize local fuel consumption. And I mean, it's an interesting part of this conversation right now. As we're talking about exporting more and more oil, we're actually refining less of our own oil. And of course, I think ultimately we need to get off our fossil fuel addiction. So I'm not going to be up here advocating to build more refineries, but I think there is part of this conversation that we need to be having about, well, shouldn't we be first and foremost consuming our own fuel before we're, importing? And can we do that in a way without building new infrastructure to help fuel the transition to other kinds of transportation and energy production? So I don't know if you know more about the Brent fuel price, if somebody might be able to explain where that comes from.
Sure. Where the Brent rate comes from is when the light crude that we produced here in North America and in the Middle East started to go down, the rates, they started drilling in the North Sea. And the North Sea, of course, is deep sea drilling, and they had to increase the cost of extracting the oil from the ocean bottom. And as a result, they tacked on an increased price to that crude that was produced through the North Sea, and they called it the Brent rate. And now for quite a few years, that rate has been very close to the Sweet Texas crude rate, and so no one's really noticed the difference. But over about the last 5-7 years, the rates have changed quite drastically, and now Sweet Texas crude is running for approximately $100 a barrel, slightly under. The Brent rate is up around $115 a barrel. And as a result, if they put this pipeline in and they start selling their product offshore, all the stuff that they're selling, they get an automatic 15% increase in profit. Or not just profit, but an increase in their total money input. So what it does in the end is it says that if they want to keep making more money, they want to start selling less and less within North America and more overseas.
Well, one thing that a number of us are worried about is specifically with this Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain pipeline is that right now they're going for a tolling application. And what that is how much per barrel they can charge to transport the products. And we think that they're really putting the cart before the horse because they haven't gone through any of the environmental studies or whatever. And what if we decide, what if a government decides, whether a current or future government decides that they've got to post a $2 billion bond or something like that, well then that has to be included in the price per barrel that they charge their customers. But if they go ahead right now this fall and get those prices per barrel set, then they can just sort of plead poverty in the future with regard to, some form of insurance or protection, because right now, in fact, in the States, Enbridge is saying we don't have to pay into this oil liability fund because it's not oil. We're not shipping oil. So, there's all kinds of ways that they're trying to get around their liabilities for spills.
And we've got Wendy.
Hi, Wendy Gales. I guess one of the biggest challenges with all these campaigns is breaking the spin in the media, the big money media campaigns, and the fact that the general media doesn't print a lot of the other side of the story. One of the things that they keep selling it on is jobs, jobs, jobs. And also with the free trade, one of the myths they sell is more jobs for us, but actually likely they'll bring a lot of more imported workers at 15% less, quite likely. I've been at forums for free trade where that was promoted as the bonus of free trade. We'll have lots more workers. And with the new laws that they brought in, they can pay them 15% less. So it's going to be hard to compete with the cost of living on that one. That's not my main concern, but that's what a lot of people's main concern And I guess another one is, well, big one is safety and what's in the material in their proprietary information. I was listening to a doctor on CBC who had this influx of sick people in his town because of the fracking. This is another example, but he couldn't get the proprietary information on what the chemicals were that they were using, probably similar to what this will be, because he'd have to sign a waiver. He could get it if he signed a waiver where he wouldn't disclose what the chemicals were, and he didn't know what to treat the people for because he didn't know what the chemicals were. So there's a big song and dance about that going around, not knowing what they're using and not being able to effectively treat people rapidly. So you need to know this information up front. If there's going to be a last minute spill or something, you need to have that information ASAP instead of having to do this legal dance of proprietary information.
Yeah, clearly here in Abbotsford, we need to know, and our city council should demand that we get the information on what's going through that pipeline and how it can affect our community. We've got another question here.
John, can I
Oh, sorry, by all means, I'm sorry.
Yeah, in my research, I actually found a website that details what is in the different diluted bitumen. Like Synovus Energy shipped diluted bitumen through the Trans Mountain Pipeline in early February, and it's called Christina Delbit. And you can actually go and see what is in that diluted bitumen. It's got the components, and like for one thing, it's got benzene. And what's interesting is I just went on the Federal Environment website today, and they don't identify benzene as one of the hazardous chemicals that they've got to have an emergency response for. So they say it's not even used commercially. So, you know, I think that there's some ignorance, I don't know whether it's willful or not, ignorance of different federal departments as to what's really going on.
Sven?
I just want to quickly address the jobs issue because I know it comes up a lot. We've heard that most of the long-term jobs with these projects in British Columbia are going to be at the terminals. And the city of Burnaby had staff did a study to see what kind of economic impacts the twinning the pipeline would have on the city of Burnaby. They project that 12 new jobs will be created in the city of Burnaby, and that'll be the most of the new jobs created for this province, for this pipeline.
I just wanted to say one more thing about the chemicals while we're on this topic. And I'm glad you brought up fracking, hydraulic fracturing for gas, because I mean increasingly there's demand for this gas for the sake of running the steam-assisted gravity drilling wells, which is how they are now accessing some of the really deep, hard-to-access oil in the oil sands. As we run out of this stuff that you can actually surface mine. And so I mean there's similar issues with SAGD wells, steam-assisted gravity drilling wells, in terms of the kind of chemicals that are being pumped into the ground. And of course there's the gas, which is a lot of it now coming from the Horn River Basin in northeastern British Columbia, which is fracking. So I mean, there's this connection between the fracking and the tar sands, which I don't think we're making that connection enough. And you're right to point out that a lot of this is proprietary information. There was a story I saw in the paper earlier today, actually, where a group of physicians have asked for some information about the chemicals that are being used for various different activities in the oil sands. Because there are these higher rates of cancer and these higher rates of a variety of different sort of rare illnesses which are popping up, and even the Alberta government recognizes that. I think there is a lot more to this story about sort of the exposure to toxins and chemicals that we really should be paying very close attention to.
Robin Allen in her paper stated that British Columbia went and gave the assessment mandate to the National Energy Board and is not involved in that. But what could take place is the province can serve 30 days notice and take back that power to to conduct assessments. And the problem that people have had with that is that the province has a reputation of just rubber stamping things. But if Christy Clark wants to give a lot of trouble to Alison Redford, then this would be one way to toughen up, the assessment process and take back that assessment mandate. So I think there's an election coming up. The NDP looks like they're on the rise and could potentially be in power, and perhaps they could take back that power as well.
Okay, so we've got time for, say, 2, maybe 3 more questions. If something's really itching to get out, now's your chance. So we've got one in the front here.
Yes, I think John's all we've done meet Mr. Slick, so we'll stick with that. Obey, by the way.
Oh, it's Mr. Slick. Mr. Slick has graced us with his presence.
I want to make a quick comment and a question. You people need to realize this is about jobs. I mean, destroying the nature might be the price we have to pay for a vibrant economy. Please think about that. Now, for our panel, now I'm told that if you invest $1 million in the oil industry, you get about 3-4 jobs created. And if you invest that same $1 million in solar panels or windmills, you get about 11. Now, if we were to do that, how do we take care of that labor shortage? Please answer that.
I don't know, Mr. Slick, but I don't think you've got an appreciative audience here tonight.
Do we have any other comments, any questions?
We have and somebody who hasn't spoken yet, ideally.
You got a quick comment?
Sure, go ahead.
I've got a real quick one here. Just a comment. We talk about the media. There was 2 oil spills that happened in Alberta earlier in the spring. Now, one got a lot of media attention, and that was Bow River, and I think they spilled about 8,000 barrels into the Bow River, and it got a lot of attention. There was another one in northern Alberta called Rainbow Lake that was huge compared to the one on the Bow River, and yet it got one little bite in one day, and that was the only thing that I heard about it. And other than that, but this is quite common as to how they deal with spills.
We're running out of time.
Okay, so just 2 more.
One here and one here.
Okay, here we go.
So with the cost of living getting more expensive with the wages, the cost of living would get more expensive if that oil were to go overseas. We'd have to buy it for more expensive, right? And we're supposed to be looking out for our future, and our future are younger people, right? Like most people that go to this university that I'm at right now, actually I go to university for as well. That's with the possibilities of the spills aside. I mean, we must remember our future lads and our children. Without some new mode of transportation implemented, then we're pretty screwed. I mean, we're just stagnating if we stay with this very very silly addiction, if you will. We need to go beyond it. And then my last little point here was with the transportation problems we're having. Everyone loves driving on Highway 1, right? Yeah? Love the traffic jams there. Apparently we're only actually allowed to look at the current amount of traffic going, and that's why we're sort of upgrading a small little bit on this. Like we're creating this new 6-lane highway. I don't know if it's a highway, but a bridge, and it's really kind of backwards thinking. We should be thinking something more sustainable, like the rapid transit that would go all across the country or across BC there, to Hope at least, which would be a beautiful thing. But anyway, thank you.
I'd like to say we're building 1970s infrastructure for the 21st century, and it's just obscene. But we've got one more question, comment.
Yeah, just a comment. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name's Sheila, and I just wanted to put out there that thank you all for coming out tonight. Again, as Ben mentioned, it's super hot, gorgeous, sunny day. Really appreciate you wanting to take the time to come together and put this together. Also wanted to shout out to all the awesome volunteers within the Pipe Up Network who did things like make these incredible info boards that are up around the room, helped to pull together the panel tonight. It's just really testament to the power, the power of the people that Sven was talking about, and the need for us all to be participating in this in whatever way we're comfortable. And I guess I just wanted to share that, it might not be feasible for everybody to get involved actively in this network and helping to put on events like this or helping to, develop a campaign targeting the company, but if you could do something like write a letter to the editor, talk to your neighbors, talk to your local politicians, just help to kind of build a buzz and a consciousness around this. It really helps a lot. It really brings it all together. And I do just want to put a shout out to Mr. Slick there and your crew, because I think this type of creative direct action is also super important and a way to call attention to the issue in a way that's
We're
creative.
not defeated yet.
You're not defeated yet. No, I hope to see you out some more. So there was some petitions that have been going around. Again, that's another small step if you don't mind signing your name to that, but also sharing your email and being, I guess, prepared to get some updates from us on where this campaign is going and ways that as the application for this expansion goes forward, that we can kind of build this movement and start escalating the opposition against it. Okay, thank you.
Friends, that's Sheila Muxlow, and she is a driving force and a growing influence here in the Fraser Valley. We look forward to her help for the next few years as we challenge this organization. I'd like to thank especially, of course, the faculty here at UFV that helped put this, or helped us get this facility, this room, and also helped with the media and with the audio visual and everything else. And thank you, Sven. Thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Ben, for your words and your thoughts. Thanks everyone for coming tonight, and be absolutely convinced that there's much work to do, and that we need all of you to participate. This community deserves a healthy, sustainable future, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. Thanks, everyone. Good night.